Good morning. Um, so I'm going to go ahead and get started uh, for the kitchen lithography demo. To start, materials needed. So I'm just going to kind of show you guys what I have set up here. We need a piece of aluminum foil. We need a piece of plexiglass and a second piece of plexiglass for your ink slab, unless you have a slab set up at home. You can see my ink slab is already rolled out here with my roller. I'm using etching ink, Portland Black by Gamblin. And then you need some cola. Any sort of cola will do. I've got my litho crayon here for drawing inside of its holder. I've got some masking tape. That's my ink. I've got 1,000 grit wet dry paper. If you had like 1,200, that would be fine. I've got some oil for cleaning up. I've got olive oil, but vegetable oil or canola would be fine. I've got a bowl of water and a sponge as well, cellulose. I've got some vinegar. If you don't have vinegar, you can skip that step. And I think that's everything we need just to get started. The first thing I'm going to want to do is take my foil and put it on my plexiglass with the shiny side up. And I'm actually going to get a new piece of foil because you want to try to avoid touching the front of your foil, because if you touch it, it can, your fingerprints can hold ink. So I'm going to pair that and keep this part here. And you want to try to get as many of the wrinkles out as possible when you're laying your foil down. And I'm going to tape this foil down to the plexiglass. Okay, so now that I've got my plate taped down, got some ink on there, it's okay. Now that I've got my plate taped down, I am going to lightly sand it with the 1,000 grit sandpaper. So I'm gonna take just a little bit of water and put that on there and just sand it. And you want to be not too aggressive with it, because if you're too aggressive with it, you could potentially poke a hole in your foil. And if you do, you can just flatten the foil back out and it should be fine when you go to print it and draw and stuff. But that can happen. I'm also trying to be careful not to, see I got a little hole there, but that's okay. Be careful not to sand my masking tape too much. This just gives the drawing material a tooth to cling to. Now, if you were using touche or another like wet, greasy drawing material, you wouldn't necessarily need to do this, but since we're using litho crayons, we definitely want to have a tooth, like a texture for the drawing material to sink into. Otherwise, your material will just slide across the surface of the aluminum foil. So if you think about aluminum plate lithography, it's a ball-grained aluminum plate. Those are made by shaking the aluminum in a vat with little balls in water, and they kind of shake across the surface and essentially texturize the surface and create a tooth, which then holds the drawing material. So, and if you flip over your aluminum plates, when you draw on aluminum plates, you can see that the backside is smooth. So, all right, should be good. So as you're drawing on your surface, if you notice that like after this step, if you notice that, you know, your drawing materials, your litho crayons are sort of sliding across parts of the areas, it could just be where you neglected to sand it appropriately. So I'm gonna take a little bit of vinegar and just wipe away some of the oxidation there. And you could also use clear packing tape on this instead of masking tape. I've seen people use both. All right, and I got a couple little holes in there, but like I said, I'm not too worried about it. This is not, you know, lithography is a pretty pristine process, and kitchen lithography is not. So, and at this point, I'm just trying to kind of dust off some of the little bits that arose. I took off, you know, I sanded up pretty close to the edge of my masking tape. When you're drawing, I wouldn't recommend, oh, that's kind of crazy. There's a weird silhouette of shape. It's like geometric sort of shapes. Okay, just kidding. I'm losing it. It's early in the morning. It's just the shape of it drying. This is just me in the morning before I've had coffee. I wouldn't recommend necessarily, you know, I'm sanding it all the way up to the edges, but I mean, if a lot of times I see people when they're drawing their kitchen lithographs, they're not necessarily drawing all the way up to the edge of the image, because obviously you're going to have ink on the edge of the tape and things like that. So yeah, that's something to kind of think about is, do you want an image that's like a bleed image versus like an image that's sort of towards the center? I have seen people, if you have a smaller piece of plexiglass, I've seen people wrap their foil around to the back of the plexi and tape it on the back. So that's another option as well. So at this point I can work on my drawing. And I've got my litho crayon here. It's just a Corns number 4. I've got a piece of paper that I'm just gonna grab to put under my hand because I don't wanna get any fingerprints on the plate unless you're wanting to play around with that. Trying to think of what to draw. I'm just gonna draw my little mask that I made here. And I did a tester earlier just to kind of get an experiment of like a range, like a tonal range and mark making range. And I was actually pretty happy with it. I do stone litho and, you know, I do plate litho some, but I'm a pretty diehard stone lithographer. That's kind of my jam. So this is a very, like, this is my second kitchen litho ever. But I mean, I can show it. I'm printing these by hand, just with like a spoon, but this was the first impression. And then the second impression printed much better. And you can see, I tried, you know, I didn't spend a lot of time on this drawing, but I tried to do some shading, like some tonal range shading. The image filled in a little bit here, but that's okay. I got a little bit of tonal range here. I did notice when I was drawing on the surface of the plate in this area here, the way it felt with the pencil was kind of slick on the surface. So I do feel like maybe that's part of the surface could have been sanded a little bit more. It seems like the lighter areas, I was really sort of pleasantly surprised that the very light gestural marks that I created showed up and held. The sort of stippling pattern held. And then the lighter values that I applied held. So it seemed like the darker areas started to fill in. So whereas in regular stone lithography, I generally will overdraw, meaning that I'll draw it a little bit darker than I need it to be, and then I'll etch it really, really hot. It seems like in kitchen lithography, you can get away with drawing it more true to what you want it to be. So I'm going to kind of keep that in mind. working on this drawing today. So yeah, so I'm just gonna start out, like I usually when I work on any drawing in general, I always start out with a quick gesture just to sort of lay everything down for size and placement. And the other thing I like about that with stone lithography is that I can always erase, you know, because with stone litho, you can take a pink pearl eraser to it. So yeah, so I'm gonna work on this drawing for a little while, and I'll check back in once I've gotten a little bit of that completed. Okay, so at this point I have finished the drawing with my number 4 litho crayon, and I've got my plate in the sink, and I'm gonna grab my cola here, and I've got a little timer on my phone here. You want to go over the image about 5 seconds with the cola. Okay, good. And what that's doing is that's etching the plate. All right, so what I'm gonna do now is take a paper towel and sort of dab the extra cola off of the top. And then I'm gonna grab my vegetable oil or olive oil, whatever you have on hand, a little bit of water, and I'm gonna clean the image off of the plate. And so I talked about this earlier when sanding. You want to be careful not to tear your aluminum foil. I don't know if you guys can see, I do have a couple little tears in my aluminum foil. So I want to be very careful not to make those worse. And that just happened because I did have a few wrinkles in my foil. So I'm going to be very careful. I've got this one right here. So I want to be very, very careful of that one when I'm inking it, when I'm cleaning it, all of that jazz. Okay. All right, so that's pretty clean there. So now at this point, so I've got my ink slab. I don't know if you guys can see my ink slab back here in the background. I already had that rolled out earlier. So I'm gonna charge my roller, okay? I'm gonna go over my plate one more time with a wet paper towel. Be careful of that little tear in my foil. Then I'm gonna switch to my sponge. I'm gonna go ahead and start inking it. And so hopefully, can you guys see my image starting to come up slowly or quickly? And this is where it's nice if you have a roller smaller than your foil. So I think you guys, your rollers will be a nice size because you guys have some smaller rollers there that I gave you. So what's happening right now is the ink is sticking to the image area and the water is protecting the non-image area. I'm going to be very, very careful of this tear that I have. If I didn't have that tear there, I'd probably be moving a little bit more quickly. I'm going to rinse my sponge out. So here's the image inked up full. I actually switched to a smaller roller. And so I've got just some mulberry paper that we're gonna lay down. It's a thinner paper, so it's easier to print by hand. And then just got a piece of printer paper that I'm gonna lay over it, but if you had a piece of newsprint, put that over it as well. Generally, your first impression's gonna be lighter. Since we're printing at home, potentially don't have a printing press. If you have a press at home, you know, run it through a printing press. But, you know, what I generally will do is start out with just the flat bottom of the spoon, or the round bottom of the spoon with the circular motion, and then after that, take the edge of the spoon. So I just printed the first proof of this one. I'm inking it up for the second proof. And things that I'm noticing is that the graphic areas that are drawn with hard lines tend to print better, whereas the shaded areas are tending to fill in. So you might want to draw shaded areas a little bit lighter. I'm going to ink it and print it again, and then I'll show you the print, and we'll make some comparisons between the two printed images, like the two impressions of this image, but also some comparisons between this one and the first tester that I did this morning. Okay, so here's the impressions of this one, and I'm not really happy with it, but the other one I'm happy with. So here's the first impression. And you can see that where the foil ripped, you can see that line through the center. So that's why if you can get your foil flat when you're taping your foil down, that will help. And then here's the second one. So the second one printed a lot better than the first. And actually looking at it in the computer screen, I hate it a lot less. I think the thing is I'm just not as happy with how I drew the mask. When I look at it on the paper, I don't like it as much. But when I look at it in the screen, it looks better. Like I can see the tonal range. I think the texture on the counter in the background turned out pretty nice. And like I said, the line work printed pretty clearly and successfully. I just think that when you're drawing shading, just keep in mind your shading can end up darkening a little bit in relation to what you originally start with. So kind of keep that in mind for clarity. But then if we compare like this one to the first one that was drawn earlier, again, like anything with crisp lines is going to print pretty easily. You know, if you look at the finger though, you know, the tonal range actually printed pretty successfully. And I think the difference between these two is I think I might have poured the Coca-Cola on this one maybe a little bit longer. Also, I think maybe the drawing is just a little bit darker on this one. So I think that was I think that might have been the biggest difference, is just the drawing was a little bit darker on this one. I guess they're both. This one's, I don't hate this one as much now. So, I mean, for my first and second kitchen lithographs, I guess I don't hate them. It's a pretty quick and easy process. I mean, you're just using Coca-Cola to etch it. So the Coca-Cola acts as an acid, and it's essentially telling your drawing material to remain greasy in those areas, and then it's telling the non-image areas to love water. And so the big thing is when you're printing it is that you don't want your plate to dry out while you're inking it. Like right now my plate's dry, and since I'm done printing this, I'll show you this. So if I skip sponging this and I go to ink it,
the whole thing's going to ink up solid black. Okay. So you don't want to do that. So that's why you sponge it with the water while you're inking up your plate. And so you want to make sure that when you're sponging it and inking it, you're using water, but you're also not using too much water. So if you notice when I was sponging water on there, I was sponging and putting just a little bit of water and kind of squeezing the extra water out of my sponge back in the bowl. So, you know, you kind of get the hang of it. The good thing is the materials are cheap. You know, I don't normally drink cola. I bought a 2 liter and I used this much just for these 2 prints. So I mean, I used about that much of a 2 liter for these 2 prints. So I don't know, maybe cola is scarce during these times. But yeah, that's it. And you know, you should have most of these materials at home. I used white vinegar, and I think it's yeah, white distilled vinegar. If you don't have vinegar, you could skip that step and just use a little bit of water to wipe it away. But yeah, that. And then you can clean up your inks as normal using your vegetable oil, and just follow up your cleaning your rollers with after you clean it with the veggie oil, just a little bit of soap and water. Just make sure you get all the ink off with the veggie oil first, and you're good to go.